a hunting trip in the Appalachians. The autumn air was crisp and dry, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and pine. Damien Russell adjusted the straps of his hunting pack and glanced at his friends. Brandon, the self-proclaimed expert, was ahead, leading the way through the dense Appalachian forest. Behind him were Alex, a quiet but reliable friend, and Nate, who brought the group's humor with his endless commentary. Damien, originally from Denver, wasn't a stranger to the outdoors. Growing up in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, he had spent countless weekends hiking trails and learning to track game with his father. But the Appalachians felt different. These woods were ancient, steeped in a kind of mystery the Rockies lacked. They had set up camp near a clearing the night before. The fire had been warm, the jokes plentiful, and the stars brighter than Damien had seen in years. They were here for deer, hoping to stock up on meat before the long winter months. The morning had been productive, with Alex spotting a herd in the distance, and the group deciding to track it deeper into the woods. By mid-afternoon, they were miles from camp, trudging through a sunlit forest where golden leaves danced in the gentle breeze. Damien noticed how unnervingly quiet it had become. The cheerful songs of birds had vanished, replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the crunch of leaves underfoot felt too loud. "You notice how quiet it is?" Damien asked, breaking the silence. Brandon shrugged. "It's just the forest. Animals sense us and clear out." But Damien wasn't convinced. He had spent enough time outdoors to know the difference between natural quiet and something else. A feeling tugged at the edge of his senses, a primal instinct he couldn't shake. The first sign came as they were crossing a small ridge. Nate was the first to see it, an animal carcass, torn and mangled, lying half buried in the leaves. It was too mutilated to identify, but the deep claw marks across its body were unmistakable. "Bear?" Alex guessed, his voice unsure. Brandon knelt by the remains, frowning. "Bears don't usually leave something like this. They'd eat more of it." Damien's unease grew. He'd heard stories about strange creatures in these woods, passed down in whispers from one hunter to another. The Skinwalker, a malevolent being from Native American folklore, was the most persistent tale. He had never believed in such things, but now, staring at the shredded remains, he wasn't so sure. They pressed on, the mood more subdued. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees casting long shadows despite the bright sun above. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves set their nerves on edge. It happened just before dusk. They had paused in a small glade to rest, sitting on fallen logs and sipping from their water bottles. Damien was scanning the tree line when he saw it, a shadow moving too quickly to be natural. It darted between the trees, vanishing as soon as he focused on it. "Did you see that?" he asked, standing abruptly. "See what?" Nate replied, looking up from his phone where he was checking the GPS. Something big, over there." Before anyone could respond, the air was split by a guttural scream, raw and primal. It echoed through the trees, freezing them in place. A moment later, the shadow reappeared, closer this time. It stepped into view, a figure crouched low, its limbs elongated and moving unnaturally. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes gleamed with a malevolence that froze Damien's blood. Brandon raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, shattering the silence, but the creature moved faster than anything humanly possible. It disappeared into the trees, the echo of its scream lingering. "We need to go," Damien said, his voice shaking. As they started back toward camp, the creature struck. It was on Nate before anyone could react, its claws slicing through his back. He screamed, collapsing to the ground as the others fired wildly into the forest. The creature vanished again, leaving only silence and Nate's shallow breaths. They carried Nate as best they could, stumbling through the woods as the sun dipped below the horizon. Darkness fell quickly, the temperature dropping with it. They had no choice but to stop and build a fire, the light their only protection against the things stalking them. Sitting around the flames, Damien's thoughts drifted to his family. He thought of his younger brother, who had always looked up to him, and his mother's warm smile whenever he came home from a trip. He wondered if he'd see them again. Brandon kept his rifle trained on the darkness, his face pale and drawn. Alex tended to Nate, who was slipping in and out of consciousness. The fire crackled, but it felt like a fragile barrier against the looming threat. When dawn finally arrived, they resumed their trek, their pace agonizingly slow. The creature followed them, its eyes flashing in the shadows but never attacking. It was toying with them, a predator savoring its prey. They reached the truck just as the sun cleared the horizon, its warmth a small comfort. Nate was unconscious by then, his breathing shallow. They loaded him into the back and sped down the winding road, the tires kicking up dust as they fled. They didn't call the police. What could they say? That something unexplainable had attacked them. Instead, they drove straight to the nearest hospital, where they left Nate in the care of confused but unquestioning doctors. Back in Denver, Damien couldn't escape the memories. The creature had taken more than just Nate's blood. It had stolen the sense of safety he had always felt in the wilderness. Some places, Damien realized, were better left untouched. The Appalachians were one of them. A hunting trip in Arizona. The rain drizzled steadily as Robert Rambo leaned against the truck, scanning the expanse of woodland ahead. Spring rains had turned the Arizona highlands lush and green, a sharp contrast to the arid plains back home in Texas. The group, Robert, his cousin Ethan, and their longtime friend Billy, had driven in the day before, their truck loaded with rifles, gear, and enough supplies to last them a few days if needed. Robert was from Amarillo, a place of sprawling flatlands and relentless winds, where the sunsets stretched for miles over an endless horizon. He'd always enjoyed the freedom of open spaces, but there was something captivating about the wooded canyons of Arizona, where the thick trees and rolling hills seemed alive with secrets. The group wasn't hunting anything specific, just out to enjoy the quiet and test their aim. They parked near a dirt trail that snaked into the woods and set out on foot, their boots squelching slightly on the rain-soaked ground. The sky was a dull gray and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. The day passed uneventfully at first. They spotted a few deer but decided to let them go, saving their energy for something larger. By late afternoon, they set up a small fire under a natural rock overhang to dry off and have lunch. The crackling flames brought warmth, but the rain continued to patter outside their shelter. "Feels good to be out here," Billy said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Beats sitting behind a desk any day." Robert nodded in agreement, but kept his eyes on the woods. Something about the stillness was unsettling. He had spent too many nights watching YouTube videos about cryptids and urban legends, and the Arizona wilderness was no stranger to strange tales. Stories of werewolf-like creatures, some called dogmen, others lumped in with skinwalkers, had been especially chilling. "You think we'll see anything weird out here?" Robert asked, half joking. Ethan smirked. "Like Bigfoot? You've been watching those videos again?" "Not Bigfoot," Robert muttered, his voice lower. "More like..." A low growl interrupted him. The three of them froze. It came from somewhere beyond the edge of the firelight, deep and guttural, unmistakably animal, but off. It wasn't a bear, and it didn't sound like a coyote. "What the hell was that?" Billy whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. The growl came again, closer this time. A rustling followed, like something heavy moving through the underbrush. Robert's heart pounded as he scanned the darkness, his fingers tightening on his rifle's grip. Then they saw it. Just at the edge of the firelight, a shape emerged. It was massive, easily standing over 7 feet when it rose on its hind legs. Its fur was matted and black, clinging to a muscular frame. The head was unmistakably canine, but the eyes, burning a feral yellow, were intelligent, locked onto them with predatory intent. "Jesus Christ," Ethan breathed. The creature let out an ear-splitting howl, a sound that seemed to reverberate in their very bones. Then it lunged. Billy fired first, the gunshot ringing out, but it did little to deter the creature. It closed the distance in seconds, swiping at Billy with claws like knives. Billy went down with a cry, his chest ripped open before he could get off another shot. "Run," Robert yelled, grabbing Ethan by the arm. They sprinted into the woods, the rain pouring harder now, turning the ground slick and treacherous. Robert's mind raced. He could hear the creature behind them, its heavy breaths and the thudding of its paws on the wet earth. Ethan stumbled, crying out as he twisted his ankle. Robert skidded to a halt, helping him to his feet. "Come on, man. We've got to keep moving." The creature's howl echoed again, closer this time. It wasn't giving up. They had no choice but to keep going, despite Ethan's limp slowing them down. The rain was relentless, soaking them to the bone and making it nearly impossible to see. Robert thought of his father, a stoic man who had taught him how to hunt and survive in the wild. His dad's words echoed in his mind. Always keep moving. Don't stop until you're safe. They finally reached the truck, their breaths ragged and their clothes plastered to their skin. Robert yanked the door open and shoved Ethan inside before scrambling into the driver's seat. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as the creature's growls grew louder. Just as the engine roared to life, the werewolf-like beast appeared, charging out of the trees. It slammed into the truck, denting the side panel and cracking the windshield. Robert floored the gas, the tires spinning in the mud before finding traction. The truck lurched forward, throwing the creature off balance. Robert didn't look back. He drove like a madman, the winding dirt road barely visible through the rain. He could still hear the creature's howls, fading with distance, but never far enough for comfort. By the time they reached the main road, the sun had started to break through the clouds. They didn't call the police. What would they say? That a monster from their nightmares had killed Billy and chased them out of the woods? They knew no one would believe them. Instead, they drove in silence, the weight of what they had seen hanging heavy in the air. Robert glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature's glowing eyes staring back. He thought of Billy, of how they'd laughed around the fire just hours before. Back in Texas, Robert couldn't shake the images from his mind. The rain-soaked woods, the glowing eyes, the howl that still haunted his dreams. The wilderness had always been a place of solace for him, but now it felt like a place of shadows where ancient horrors still roamed. Some stories, he realized, weren't just stories. The sun hung high in the Wyoming sky, obscured by a thick layer of gray clouds that stretched as far as the horizon. Sylvester Stallone pulled his beat-up sedan into the lone gas station at the edge of a dusty highway. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time, with peeling paint on the pumps and a weathered sign swaying in the wind. The clouds above threatened rain, but none came, leaving the air heavy and suffocating. Sylvester, or Sylv to those who knew him back in Lawrence, Kansas, stepped out of the car and stretched his legs. Lawrence was a quiet town, with red brick streets and old houses lined with elm trees. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and summers were filled with long, lazy days. This trip to Wyoming was supposed to be a break, a chance to clear his head after a rough patch at work. The station's clerk, an older man with deep-set eyes, barely glanced up as Sylv stepped inside. He grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of chips, paying in cash before heading back to his car. Something about the station made him uneasy. The silence, perhaps, or the way the clerk seemed to watch him from the corner of his eye. As Sylv pulled back onto the highway, he noticed a small dirt road branching off into the woods. A sign, barely legible through the grime, read, "Picnic Area 2 miles." On a whim, he turned down the road, the gravel crunching beneath his tires. The picnic area was deserted, a clearing surrounded by dense pines that swayed gently in the breeze. He parked the car and wandered toward a small fire pit, its charred stones blackened by countless campfires. The air was cooler here, and the shadows under the trees seemed to stretch longer than they should. He set up a small fire using some wood left behind, more out of boredom than necessity. As he watched the flames dance, his thoughts drifted to his family. His younger sister, Gina, always teased him about his impromptu road trips. "You're just running away," she'd say with a smirk, though her tone was more playful than accusatory. He missed her, he realized, and the warmth of home. The first sound came just as dusk began to settle, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the air. Sylv froze, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Probably just a coyote," he muttered, though the sound didn't match the sharp yips he was used to hearing on Kansas nights. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a shadow moving unnaturally between the trees. As it stepped into the dim light of the fire, Sylv's breath caught in his throat. The creature was tall and gaunt, its skin stretched tight over sinewy muscles. Its face was a grotesque mix of human and animal, with sharp, angular features and eyes that glowed faintly in the dying light. He didn't know how long he sat there, frozen, before the creature moved. It prowled closer, its long limbs carrying it with an unnatural grace. Sylv scrambled back toward his car, heart pounding as he fumbled with his keys. Before he could reach the door, something heavy slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. His vision blurred as he felt claws rake across his arm, a searing pain that left him gasping. The creature didn't kill him. Instead, it dragged him into the woods, its grip ironclad despite his struggles. Sylv lost track of time as they moved deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, the air colder. When they finally stopped, he found himself in a small clearing surrounded by twisted, gnarled trees. The creature left him there, disappearing into the shadows with an eerie silence. He sat by the fire, which still smoldered faintly, wrapping his torn arm with a strip of his shirt. His mind raced, piecing together fragmented thoughts and half-remembered stories. He had seen videos online about the Ruguru, a creature from Native American lore that preyed on the lost and the vulnerable. He had dismissed them as nonsense then, but now he wasn't so sure. The night passed in fits of fear and exhaustion. The creature's eyes appeared in the darkness more than once, watching, waiting. Sylv didn't dare sleep, keeping the fire alive with whatever he could find. When dawn finally broke, he saw his chance. The creature had disappeared, perhaps retreating to wherever it hid during the day. Sylv stumbled through the woods, guided by the faint hum of the highway in the distance. It wasn't long before he broke through the tree line, the sight of the open road filling him with a surge of hope. He waved frantically as a pickup truck approached, its driver, a middle-aged woman, slamming on the brakes. She didn't ask many questions as he climbed into the cab, bloodied and disheveled. "You're lucky I came by," she said, her eyes scanning the woods with suspicion. Sylv didn't argue. As the truck rumbled toward town, he glanced back at the forest, half expecting to see the creature watching him from the shadows. But the woods were still, the only movement, the swaying of the pines in the morning breeze. He never told anyone about what happened. Back in Lawrence, he avoided the woods and refused to watch any more cryptid videos. The scars on his arm faded with time, but the memory of that summer day in Wyoming never did. Some places, he realized, weren't meant to be explored.